December 1940. Outside Independence, Missouri, surveyors walk frozen ground that will become Lake City Ordnance Plant. In Washington, Army ordnance officers treat small arms ammunition as one of the most critical procurement failures in the entire defense buildup. The United States is raising divisions for a war it has not yet entered, and it does not have enough rifle and machine gun cartridges for the training those divisions require. Not because brass has vanished, not because U-boats have closed the sea lanes, because the industrial machine that will later flood the world with American firepower does not exist yet. Old stocks are shrinking, new lines are too few. Aid shipped overseas tightens the margin further. Commanders already cut live fire drills, afraid the reserve will not survive the next expansion. Every round that is not made is a firefight that may be lost later, a hill that may be abandoned, a soldier who may not come home. And the version of this story the internet prefers is simpler. One teenage girl on a factory floor, one idea the engineers missed, one invention that saved the arsenal. The records do not give that heroine. What they give is harder and larger. There is a popular telling that centers on a 19-year-old factory worker who supposedly saw what every engineer missed and transformed ammunition production with a single brilliant idea. It is a perfect story for the algorithm. There is only one problem. The surviving documentation does not hand us a named girl who single-handedly solved America's ammunition crisis. The versions that circulate eventually admit the name is a stand-in. But the real story is not smaller. It is bigger. What happened at plants like Lake City was not one miracle invention. It was thousands of workers, many of them women with almost no industrial experience, learning dangerous machines, finding bottlenecks, improving routines, and turning a half-built wartime industry into an arsenal. No single pair of hands made 6 billion rounds. A system did. And in 1941, that system was still being invented. After the First World War, the United States sat on enormous ammunition reserves. Year after year, training ate into them. Other rounds deteriorated in storage. New production stayed limited. By early 1940, the stockpile of .30 caliber ammunition had fallen dramatically from its post-war peak. Then the Army began to expand. Britain needed help. Training requirements exploded. Suddenly the reserve stopped looking like a cushion and started looking like a warning light. Army officials called small arms ammunition one of their most critical procurement problems. Commanders warned that shortages were already restricting how hard they could train the men they had. The logic was brutal. A rifle without cartridges is furniture. A machine gun without belts is only weight. Every new division multiplied the hunger. Every overseas shipment narrowed the margin at home. Every delayed press line pushed the crisis 1 week closer. So the War Department did something it had never attempted at this scale. It started building ammunition factories almost from scratch, not as a luxury of peacetime planning, but as an emergency answer to a stockpile that was disappearing in plain sight. One of them was Lake City, outside Independence, Missouri. Ground broke at the end of 1940. The site would grow into a sprawling government-owned plant operated by Remington. Its job was brutally simple on paper. Make small arms ammunition. Millions of rounds, then hundreds of millions, then billions. Building walls was the easy part. A cartridge line needs presses, furnaces, inspection gear, loading machinery, gauges, conveyors, and workers who can keep all of it synchronized. One missing tool can stall a process. One quality failure can ruin thousands of rounds. One jam can stop a line cold while demand keeps climbing. The first loaded cartridges left Lake City in September 1941, ahead of the original estimate. The timing could not have been sharper. 3 months later, Pearl Harbor. A production emergency had just become a shooting war. Now every lost hour mattered more. The plant that had been a hedge against shortage became a pillar of survival. What had been a race to arm the training camp became a race to arm the world. By mid-shift, the plant is a furnace. Rows of stamping presses hammer brass into cups. Annealing ovens throw heat that drives the air past temperatures that would empty a modern office. Conveyors clatter without pause. Over everything hangs the smell of hot metal, machine oil and sweat. Thousands of workers fill the floor, a huge share of them women drawn from farms, kitchens and shop counters. Many have never set foot in heavy industry. Within weeks, they run machines that can take a hand off at the wrist. 12-hour shifts. No romance, only quota. The machinery gets the photographs, but machines do not run themselves. Jobs are broken into precise tasks. Supervisors watch output. Inspectors watch quality. Mechanics chase stoppages. And the people standing closest to the line learn what no blueprint fully shows. Which guide jams when the metal runs hot? Which motion destroys a wrist after 6 hours? Which tiny adjustment saves seconds that compound into crates? This is where the one-girl legend gets one thing exactly right. The person beside a problem all day can see what the person who designed the system cannot. Ammunition production is a chain. Form the brass, shape the case, anneal, trim. Form the primer pocket, load the primer, charge the powder, seat the bullet, crimp, inspect, pack, ship. If one stage is slower than everything before it, the entire factory eventually moves at the speed of that bottleneck. On many lines, the choke point is brutally human. Casings lined by hand into alignment tracks before they can be charged and crimped. Arms in a tight loop. Pick, place, slide, thousands of times an hour. On a strong hour, the table keeps pace. On a tired hour, it falls behind. One slipped grip, one jammed rail, one broken rhythm, and the sequence freezes. Every stoppage means recalibration. Every recalibration means lost seconds. The women are not slow. They are human. And human hands can hold a rhythm only so long before fatigue eats the margin. Those lost seconds do not look like sabotage. They pile up invisibly, hour after hour, while demand on two oceans climbs. A change that saves 2 seconds does not sound heroic. But if the same motion repeats tens of thousands of times, 2 seconds become hours. Hours become shifts. Shifts become millions of cartridges. The wartime production miracle is built from improvements like that. New machinery, better layouts, faster handling, smarter inspection, simplified work, extra shifts. Workers and mechanics learning how to keep metal moving without sacrificing the round that has to fire when it must. The breakthrough is not that engineers become unnecessary. It is that engineers, mechanics, managers, and the factory floor become one feedback loop. By year's end, that loop will support a capacity Frankfurt Arsenal could not have matched alone. More than 6 times over. How that network is stood up in months is the part the legend skips. Lake City is not alone. The government also raises major small arms plants at Denver and St. Louis. By the end of 1941, those first new plants together hold capacity for more than 300 million rounds a month. More than 6 times what Frankfurt Arsenal had carried almost alone. A year earlier, officials feared shortages were choking training. Now an industrial web can throw hundreds of millions of cartridges into the system every month. It is still not time to rest. After Pearl Harbor, demand surges again. More .50 caliber, more rifle ammunition, more machine gun belts. Plants expand, lines multiply, schedules bend as the battlefield bends. Calibers shift, priorities rewrite themselves overnight. The ammunition industry becomes a living machine, constantly adjusted to feed a war fought on 2 oceans at once. At full wartime scale, Lake City becomes one of the great small arms ammunition factories on Earth. During its World War II production run, the plant turns out nearly 6 billion rounds, and even that is only a fraction of total American military output. Think what 6 billion cartridges means. Everyone formed, loaded, inspected, packed, tracked, then moved by rail, ship, truck, and supply unit until it reaches a soldier in France, Italy, New Guinea, the Philippines, or some island most Americans have never heard of. That is the hidden face of the arsenal of democracy. The famous image is the tank rolling out of Detroit, the bomber leaving the line, the carrier clearing the yard. A cartridge is almost invisible beside them. But wars drink them by the millions. The industrial problem is never making one perfect round. It is making the next one, and the next, and the next, for years. This is why the women on those lines matter. Not because one fictional teenager secretly outsmarted every engineer in America. Because thousands of women entered jobs rarely open to them before the war and became part of the production system almost overnight. At Lake City, women worked throughout the manufacturing operation. Surviving oral histories still hold some of their names. Rosalind Priest on production stations. Alice McElderry in box operations and soldering. They are not symbols posed beside machines for a poster. They are workers inside the machinery of war. When output rises, it is not because a slogan told America to try harder. It rises because ordinary people learned specialized tasks, solved daily jams, kept lines alive, and returned for the next shift when the previous one had already taken everything they had. The miracle is repetition. Millions of small actions, done correctly enough, quickly enough, for long enough to outlast the enemy's ability to consume what those actions produced. So did one 19-year-old girl save America from running out of bullets. The evidence does not support that claim, and there is no need to invent her, because the documented story is more impressive. America really did enter the build-up with a serious small arms ammunition shortage. The Army really did fear that shortage was crippling training. The government really did raise an enormous new plant network at breathtaking speed. Lake City really did begin producing in 1941. Women really did become a major pillar of the wartime industrial workforce. And Lake City really did manufacture nearly 6 billion rounds during the war. That transformation did not happen because one person had a perfect idea. It happened because a production system learned, engineers redesigned, mechanics improvised, managers changed schedules, workers adapted movements, inspectors caught defects, and every improvement was multiplied millions of times. That may be less tidy than the legend, but it explains American industrial power far better. The arsenal of democracy was not a magical factory that appeared fully formed on December 7, 1941. It had to be built, it had to be staffed, it had to be debugged, and it had to learn faster than the war could consume what it produced. By the end, billions of rounds moved through a system that only a few years earlier had struggled to arm a proper training schedule. That is the real transformation. Not one girl defeating a room full of engineers. Something harder. Engineers, mechanics, managers, and thousands of ordinary workers solving the same problem together. How do you turn seconds into ammunition? And how do you do it millions of times before the soldiers at the far end of the chain need the next box? For the decisions, systems, and overlooked people behind the battles, the full record continues here. Subscribe, because sometimes the difference between an army that advances and one that stops is measured in something smaller than a tank. Sometimes it is measured one cartridge at a time.